Okay, and then lastly, so those are all the questions I had. The last thing that I did want to just talk about really quickly was just, again, that the article that I mentioned that I put in the group yesterday with finding your maintenance calories post-diet. I did talk a little bit about this in the beginning. There are some confusing things that I know are confusing. So please, 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 once you read through that, if you have questions, if you're confused about anything, please let me know. Maybe we can, talk more about that in next week's call. But I think that is one of the missing pieces, the metabolic understanding what is happening to your body during a dieting phase, and understanding that these processes that are going on and these things that are down regulating from a hormonal perspective, from a metabolic perspective, it's not like they come down and they just stop, right? That's why reverse dieting and being super mindful and educated on these things is important, because those processes will literally happen in the opposite direction as you begin to eat more food. But you want to make sure that you're doing it in a very strategic way, so that you're not strategic and, smart, so that you're not just packing on all the pounds again, right? So definitely please read through that article, ask questions. We can talk about that in the chat. We can talk about that in the group as well. But that is something that is been a missing piece for a lot of people, is what happens after, and having a plan for that, right? You don't just end the diet, because when you end a dieting phase, especially if you've had a lot of progress, especially if it's been 16 weeks, maybe longer than that, like, you are going to feel you're going to feel you're going to feel hunger. You're going to feel cravings. You're going to feel like, I just did this for 16 weeks. Maybe you got to your goal, and so now you want to celebrate. That's totally fine, but we have to make sure that we are mindful and we're not just throwing it out the window and, eating whatever and all that, because it's going to cause some things that we don't want to happen. Nicole said, is this the case if you are a chronic dieter? So one of the biggest things there is to realize that if you have been kind of like yo-yo dieting, or if you've been chronically restricting or dieting for a long period of time, your body can adapt to that intake. It is a complex scenario, but that is kind of, I did mention this like very briefly in that article about I think it's under why you reverse diet, and it's like the last bullet point. One of the reverse dieting concepts that's not related to after fat loss phase is actually, if you have been chronically dieting for a long time, your body could have adapted to, your current intake. And so if you want to continue to lose body fat, you have to drop your calories even lower, which might not be sustainable or something that you want to do. So if that's the case, then in that scenario, it means that you'd really, really want to start to work your calories back up to a place that is more, realistic for you and more sustainable for you, and stay there for a little bit of time. When I say a little bit of time, probably a few months at the minimum, to really kind of balance out that maintenance, right? To kind of ramp things back up again, get your hormones to a better place. There's a lot of different nuances with that, but if you do feel like you've been restricting for a while and maybe dieting for a while, maybe you are in that kind of camp where your calories are super low and you do want to lose body fat, but you can't, reduce your calories anymore without, being able to sustain it for a period of time to lose that body fat. That might mean that you need to reverse diet and get out of that deficit, spend time at maintenance for a while. And then once things have kind of normalized, and once you've gotten your calories back to a place that is, realistic maintenance for you, then going back into a fat loss phase, or if that's your goal. Another thing to think about though too is that I would say that this is, from just a real perspective, from my experience with people, for myself, things that I've thought in the past, all the research that I've done, there's a huge psychological component to this, where it's like we feel like we've been in a deficit for a long time, or like we've gone into a deficit for a long time. And so psychologically, we feel like we've been in a deficit, but physiologically we may not actually have been in a deficit for as long as we think. And that's where the psychological component of dieting and fat loss and all of that comes into play, because maybe, you were, eating 1,000 calories during the week, and then on Saturday or some event came up and you ate a ton more, or maybe it was like midnight one night and you went into the fridge and got a bunch of food, and you didn't track that, right? So like in the tracker, it says you've been eating this amount of calories, and I'm not saying anybody's doing this, but I've done it in the past. I've been not truthful with my tracking in the past. It's part of human nature. So that's a huge piece of it too, where it's like, have I actually truly been eating this amount of calories for this period of time? Or is that what I think that I've been doing because that's what's in my tracker? Have I been tracking those licks, nibbles, and bites, that scoop of peanut butter, that, those, this sounds so stupid, but those 4 peanuts that you had in the morning, you had 4 peanuts again for a midday snack, and then 4 peanuts again. I don't know why I'm using peanuts, but it doesn't feel like, okay, I'm having 4 peanuts 5 times throughout the day, but I'm not tracking that because it's 4 peanuts, right? Doesn't feel like it's a lot that time that you're consuming it, but like those things add up. And so that's where being really, really honest with your tracking, being very accurate. Also, if you're not weighing your food, that's another area that there's a lot of estimation that can be not correct. I forgot the stat, but there's lots of studies that have been done on the amount of food that we think that we're consuming versus the actual amount. And I think it's like 70% of people underestimate the amount of food that they're actually consuming. That's, again, not saying that people are doing this, but it's very, very common. And so it's just kind of thinking through that. Nicole said, I've loved food way too much to think I was ever that low of calories for any sustained period of time, but the topic is always interesting me. Not saying that you're at that low calories, but it's a great question. It's something that I think there's some misinformation out there and some things that people kind of need to just understand a little bit more of, like, okay, how much am I actually consuming? And then also when it comes to like eating out at restaurants and things like that, it's crazy how many calories. I talked about this a few weeks ago, or maybe a few months ago, I think in one of our first chats, but it's crazy the amount of calories that are in restaurant foods. Like, if you're going to a restaurant and you're having a meal, like dinner, you're having drinks, you're having dessert, it's easily over 1,000 calories, like easily. And a lot of people don't think about that, because 1,000 calories, that's a lot, right? Especially if your goal is 1,600 calories. I'm not saying that's anybody's goal, but that can add up, right? Can add up over time. And so I think that's something that, just being super honest with yourself and super, like if you have a specific goal, tracking is important. I'm not saying that you have to track forever, but it will give you those objective metrics, right? Because subjective versus objective are very different. They both play into it, but the more objective we can get with our eating and with our tracking, the more concrete and real data that we can gather to make decisions off of, right? And so that's kind of wrapping this up for today's call, but especially with the reverse diet, that's why I really, really encourage everybody to, if you are coming out of a fat loss phase, whenever that's the case, really having a plan for that. Having a plan where it's like, okay, I can celebrate a little bit. I can work some fun foods in. I can work some flexibility in. But if I don't stick with my routines, if I don't eat the same foods that I was eating when I was in the diet, just adding a little bit more, I promise you it's not going to be a good situation. So yeah, I'm going to end on that in terms of just kind of wrapping things up today. We are at our hour mark. I did actually get through all the questions I'm surprised about. But hopefully that helped today. Hopefully kind of opened up some insights or some more things to think about. Please, 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 if you have follow-up questions or if you just want to talk through some things, post in the group. That's what it's here for. We can of course, talk about more things next week. And yeah, that's all I got for today. I will be posting this replay if you missed it, if you came in late. I'll post it in the group